Hello, Eagles Nation. Vincent Foast here, and welcome to Week 5 Eagles Chat. As again, the Eagles struggle to figure out that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 quarters in a football game. Well, who knows if they even know how to count, being they struggled with their own count before some snaps. Of course, me referring to some of those false start penalties that we saw. But hey, the Eagles unfortunately pick up their first loss of the season. We're going to get into it and cover it all coming up here on Eagles Chat. But before we do so, make sure to like and subscribe to the Eagles Chat YouTube channel, as well as following us on Instagram at Chat Eagles, where you can find daily updates on your birds. You can also find our Instagram in the description of this Eagles Chat video. But now let's get right into it. We're going to first start off with, yes, the injury update. Now we have two big-time players on this injury update, both on the offense. We're going to get right into it, and we're going to first start off with Landon Dickerson, the Pro Bowl left guard for the Birds. Now, he exited the game with an ankle injury. It looked like his left ankle was the one that was injured, and it looked like he rolled up during a play in the first quarter. Of course, that's when it happened, was in the first quarter. Now, of course, knowing Landon Dickerson, this is not the first time the injury bug bit him this season. Of course, he got hurt with it a little bit before in weeks 1 and 2, where he was seen on the injury report. And of course, those of you who remember, he had some surgery over the offseason. So Landon Dickerson right now, the injury bug has kind of been ruling a little bit of his career so far this season specifically. And hopefully it's nothing too bad. And of course, remember, the Eagles have a short week. They play Thursday Night Football this week against the New York Giants starting off week 6. So we'll have to see what happens. It's a short week, but again, we'll make sure to do the best that we can. Again, remember to follow us on our Instagram page. We'll make sure to get all the Eagles injury reports up to you as fast as possible. Every time the Eagles practice during the week, an injury report is released, and we'll make sure to get that out to you as fast as we possibly can. That way, you're updated on all that is going on with your Birds, especially in the injury column. But our next injury that we have up here is backup tight end Grant Calcaterra. Now, the news, of course, with him, he obviously, yes, left the game with an oblique injury, and he had 2 catches prior to him coming off the field. He had 2 catches for 18 yards, and this is something where we'll have to see exactly what kind of forms in the upcoming days with Calcaterra, and hopefully, again, it is nothing too substantial. And then, of course, going back to the Dickerson situation, he was spotted, though, after the game, walking kind of with a limp, and he had on his left ankle, it was all taped up, and this was according to per CBS Sports Jeff Kerr. So that is something that was seen by CBS Sports Jeff Kerr, and that again is an update on Landon Dickerson, that it was taped up and he was seen limping with the left ankle tape. So that's some other news that was on Landon Dickerson's case. So hopefully nothing too bad. Again, we'll make sure to keep you updated on all that is going on with the Eagles injury report this week. Again, make sure to follow us on our Instagram page to stay updated. But let's get into kind of the nitty-gritty of this Eagles chat. And you already know, first, I'm going to start off with the penalties. Now, folks, I'm not going to make the penalties the main source for this loss, and there's absolutely no reason that I should. Now, of course, everyone's talking about, yes, we all know the penalty that should have been called at the end of the game on Dallas Goedert, where Goedert was practically fully tackled before the ball even got into his general direction, or his general area, I should say. Now, don't get me wrong. Did I agree with all the calls that happened today? No, not one bit. But in no way am I going to say the calls are the 100% reason that the Birds lost this game. And then the reason I'm saying so, well, yeah, you were up 17-3 at a specific part of this game, right? We all remember that. The Eagles were kind of leading 17-3, and they went into halftime. Of course, they were up 10-3 at halftime. They came out, got another great score. They were up 17-3 in the third quarter. Everything was high and pretty. Everyone was having a great time. The link was bopping, woohoo. The bells were out, everything. So this was something that kind of, was the reason that I say I can't blame it all on the calls. And that a big reason for that was because the Eagles were just shooting themselves in the foot. And of course, I mentioned in the beginning of this Eagles chat, of course, some of those false start penalties. The Eagles had multiple big-time plays that were brought back because of unfortunate and, yeah, I'll say it, stupid calls. And of course, we saw calls like the Saquon shift, that illegal shift motion that happened that was called on Barkley Wright. And of course, just other bad penalties that happened specifically at the end of the game. Like, for example, that Zach Bond late hit, which was a personal foul that really did not help him, as the Eagles had it look like a pretty good stop right there. But unfortunately, Makuba, yes, he made the tackle, but Zach Bond came in. It was a late hit, stuff that you just can't do. And even though you may not agree with that call and you may think it was a light call, You can think whatever you want. I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, that call, okay, I guess I'll take it. It was kind of a late hit, but still, you can't put the refs in that type of situation. You know what the refs have been calling the entire game. You know how picky that this refereeing crew was, and the stuff that they were taking out was just, was crazy at times. Again, me saying I didn't agree with every call, I said that already, but just to make sure that's clear. But still, again, there were certain plays that the Eagles made that you just couldn't do. Certain penalties that there was no reason for. Again, you know how the refs were calling the game. There's no reason to push it to that limit. And of course, yes, there were some other calls. There was an intentional grounding that was called back, of course, where Bo Nix was clearly in the grasp. And unfortunately, the refs overturned that. They kind of picked that flag up and said, oh, it's okay. Continue on with the play. So there were some calls like that. Again, that's just another one I add onto the list of ones I didn't agree with. But still, there were other calls where the Eagles had a good jump, and unfortunately, they couldn't do anything with it. There were many calls where Barkley had some good runs. It was taken back. There was another great call I should say. There was another call where it was a big gain. I'm pretty sure the pass was to Devontae Smith. He came down with the ball. Oh, what happened? No, it was called back because of an unfortunate play. You had the ineligible man downfield, which haunted them a specific time tonight. So there were a good portion of explosive plays that were called back. And we already know the Eagles, for some reason, have trouble creating those plays. So when they get it and it's called back by a stupid penalty, it hurts twice as much. And of course, again, I'm not going to blame this loss 100% on the penalties. Yeah, well, there's some bad calls. Don't get me wrong. That Goddard one, unacceptable. But again, when your offense goes 5 of 6 of the second half drives resulted in 0 points, and you were outscored 18-0 in the fourth quarter, that's a little bit of a problem. And this is something where, again, I can't just say that the calls are the reason that the Eagles lost. With things like that, 5 of 6 of your second half drives resulted in 0 points. You had 3 and outs, and next thing you know, you weren't giving your defense any boost, and your defense was constantly going out there. They were getting tired. So this is that type of thing where I can't buy it. I'm not going to say the calls are the reason 100% that the Eagles lost. If some of those calls went the Eagles' way, would we be talking about a different ending? Absolutely. But there's no reason that the Broncos should have taken the lead. There's no reason that it should have been 18-17, and then, of course, it proceeded to 21 points for the Broncos, right? But there's no reason that should have ever happened. The Eagles were shooting at the Broncos, and then they turned the gun around and faced it and pointed it right at their own face. So this is something where, again, there's no reason in that game that we should have all been narrowing it down to one specific call at the end of the game and saying, hey, that was the reason that the Eagles lost because of that Dallas Goedert missed pass interference call right there. There's no reason that ever should have gotten to that point. They were up 17-3. There's no reason that it should have got to the end of the game where the Eagles were on a final drive situation where they had to score a touchdown. And if that call wasn't called, then they would have probably won the game if that call was called because they would have been in the red zone. So it's utterly stupid at the end of the day that we all started to get to the point where we were blaming it on that one specific call, even though it should have never gotten to that point. And I'll continue to say that. And of course, now moving into the offense in general. Now, as many bads that came out of this game, I want to start off with the goods. And of course, I don't want to make this Eagles chat I don't want to make the whole thing kind of a negative, but of course, let's talk about some of the goods. And this was something where the Eagles were able to get their wide receivers involved early on, and something where they were able to get the short pass game going. And of course, we saw some good numbers out of Devontae Smith, right? 8 receptions for 114 yards. Even though A.J. Brown could have probably had a little bit of a better game with some miscommunication. We'll talk about that in a little bit. A.J. Brown still had 5 receptions for 43 yards. And of course, Dallas Goedert was able to get on the board, 3 receptions, 19 yards. He had the 1 touchdown. Saquon Barkley had 3 receptions for 58 yards. Of course, he had that 147-yard touchdown, which was a dime by Hurts. Absolutely beautiful throw. So as many bads that came out of this game for the offense, there was goods. But again, here we go again with the Eagles only playing a specific portion of the game and then having that whole section of the game where the offense is just completely blank. They lost power. They blacked out. And this is something that, yes, folks, it hasn't just happened in this game. It didn't just happen in last game. It has happened in all 5 games that have happened so far this year. It happened, for God's sakes, in week 1 against the Dallas Cowboys, where they were on, and then all of a sudden everything just died. I mean, the Eagles in back-to-back weeks now with the Buccaneers and now the Broncos, and back-to-back weeks should have had the Buccaneers put away, and they should have had the Broncos put away. But no, they let them back in the game. The Buccaneers, they got lucky with. They were able to hold them off. The defense was able to step up, and the offense was put in some good field position at times last week. They were able to hold on to that one. But this week, didn't get away with it. The Broncos are a team that you have to play all 4 quarters against, and especially the defense that the Broncos have up there. Of course, now at the end of the game today, the Broncos now have 15 sacks total now, 104 pressures with a 46.8% pressure rate. So, yes, the Broncos are not a team to mess around with, and especially with a defense like this, if you have the opportunity, you have to take it. And the Eagles did have the opportunity many times, but didn't take it. And of course, now that kind of leads me into the not so good portion of what we saw from the offense. And yes, you already know, the miscommunication. That was something on a whole nother level. And of course, you folks probably have an idea of where you think I'm going with this whole situation. Of course, I'm going right to that A.J. Brown situation where Brown kind of slowed up. And of course, when that play originally happened, a lot of people were going after Hurts, of course, me included, being, Hurts completely overthrew A.J. Brown. He had him right there. That would have been a touchdown. Absolutely, it would have been. That was a dime. Brown would have got that. There was no one in front of him. He had those DBs burnt. He would have been off. It would have been a long touchdown. Everyone would have been jumping. The link would have went crazy, right? But no, A.J. Brown slowed down. Of course, at the end of the game, A.J. Brown was talked to, and this is some of the quotes that came in from Brown. And when it came to it, he said this, quote, "From my point of view, we just missed it." And then his next quote was picked out. Of course, he said many things, but here were some of the main quotes. Another one stated, "When I looked up, I didn't see the ball. When I looked back, I didn't see the ball." And then, of course, he was then asked, did you talk to this to Jalen after the game? And he came out with one word, no. So did he talk about it with Jalen? No, he didn't after the game. So this was something where we saw miscommunication. And of course, that A.J. Brown situation, that specific play, was not the only time that we saw miscommunication. As a matter of fact, we saw it with Jahan Dotson as well. There was a time where Hurts, again, with the long ball, where, again, the long ball had its pros and it had its cons this game. It connected sometimes, of course, that Barkley 47-yarder, but it also didn't connect at times, right? And yes, the Jahan Dotson one. There was a Jahan Dotson long ball where Hurts flew it out. It had the correct distance. The only thing is, you looked at that, Dotson was looking up into the sky. It was kind of what A.J. Brown specifically described on the ball that he was looking for. When I looked up, I didn't see the ball, and when I looked back, I didn't see it. Well, it looked like the same situation with Jahan Dotson. With that throw, Dotson was curling out left. Hurts threw the ball to the right. So again, the miscommunication in this Eagles locker room, or I should say out in the field for the Eagles right now, is kind of concerning, and especially with these explosive plays, which the Eagles had multiple of them and could not connect and could not capitalize on these plays. Yeah, this is something where these were plays that really could have put the Broncos away, and this is something where you could have easily capitalized on that 17-3 lead and absolutely buried the Broncos. Hell, it could have been a huge, big-time funeral for the Broncos today, but the Birds could not connect multiple times. It wasn't just that A.J. Brown play. There was a Jahan Dotson play. There were a couple others where the opportunities were there, but they couldn't get them. There were some big-time runs from Saquon Barkley, and this is another one where some people were telling me today, after they saw the stats, they were basically telling me, I really thought Saquon Barkley got some more runs, got more touches. Well, in a way, he kind of did, but didn't. And of course, going over his stats, he had 6 carries for 30 yards, right? Doesn't seem like a lot. A lot of people were telling me, I thought he got more than that. Well, a matter of fact, he kind of did. And what I mean by that was the touches that he got that didn't count. And of course, that was because of some stupid penalties where there was some good rushes by Barkley. Again, you want to talk about explosive plays? There you go. There were some explosive run plays for Barkley, but they were called back. And this is that type of situation where there were some false starts. There was that ineligible man downfield, which was another one where the Eagles' offensive line was preparing for it looked like a throw, but the next thing you know, it was handed off. So it was just no one was on the same page And this was something that haunted the Eagles. I should say, not the first half, but it haunted them in the second half, where the offensive line was off from what the QB had in mind and was off from what the wide receivers had in mind. So it was just absolutely no one was on the same page. It was kind of tough to watch, and especially with the type of weekend that Philly sports have been having, yeah, it wasn't great. And of course, going over Barkley's stamp with the carries in the first quarter, he had a carry at the 6:44 mark for 3 yards. Also in the first quarter at the 4:59 mark, he had that 17-yard carry, which is the longest of his day. And then, of course, now moving to the second quarter at the 11:52 mark, he had a 4-yard carry. Again in the second quarter, 11:18 mark, he had the 4-yard carry. Second quarter again, 2:39 mark, he had 2 yards. In the fourth quarter, at the 6:52 mark, he had a touch, but 0 yards. And this was something for Barkley, kind of concerning on what this play calls were kind of going to. And yes, that's where I'm going next right here with Kevin Patullo. You already know I have to talk about this with the play call situation. With the Eagles, this is something pretty concerning. I'm sure everyone knows at this point, but I saw a little bit of an interesting stat coming into this game with how this offense is necessarily called. And this stat doesn't include this game, but it was with the 4 prior games leading into this one. And that was the shotgun formation. When the Eagles are lined up in the shotgun formation, 70% of the time they pass, right? And that type of situation, shotgun formation, 70% of the time with a pass pistol formation, yes, that's going to be a pass. 81% of the time, they run when in the run step before the game. Now, of course, this is something where in the shotgun formation, 70% of the time, pass pistol formation, 81% of the time, it's a run. And this is something where, again, you want to talk about the Eagles' offense being so easy to read. Well, there you go. There's an example of it. So, again, when we look at the situation with how Kevin Patullo is calling games, he never seems to adjust. And this is where we're talking about with the only one half of football that he is able to coordinate. And knowing offensive coordinators, people think that they are calling the plays for that specific moment. No, they are calling the plays for it to develop down the line. That play that they are calling is to help set up something down the line. And right now with Kevin Patullo, he is not necessarily adjusting, and the plays that he is calling aren't really developing into something down the line. It just seems to be kind of a thing where it's at that specific moment, and it works. If it works in that half, it's not going to work in the next half because he just doesn't adjust. And what do opposing teams' defenses do? They adjust. What did we see about the Buccaneers last week? What did Todd Bowles do? He adjusted to what the Eagles defense was doing. He adjusted the blitz. And this is something where, again, yes, folks, I know Eagles fans know this very well. The Eagles offense and them adjusting and reacting and reading the blitz is not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. And it's not just this year. It's kind of something that has happened in the past as well. So this is another one of those situations where, you look at how the Eagles read defenses and their ability and how they adjust to defenses. It's not great. And therefore, that is your issue on why the Eagles, so far, every single game this season, have only played one specific half of football, whether it's the first half, whether it's in the second half. It doesn't matter. They only play one half of football. Now, these past couple of weeks, the theme has been we only know how to play football really in, I should say the first half. They played well in the first half last week against the Bucs. They played well in the first half this week. And yes, last week and this week, they collapsed in the second half. Well, the 2 weeks prior to these past 2 weeks, it was the opposite. They played well in the second half, but didn't play that well in the first half. So it's kind of all over the place right now. And again, with Kevin Patullo, as the season continues, this is something where I was really hoping to see him develop. But right now, I'm still only seeing a guy who prepares for half the game and a guy who really doesn't seem to have a plan for the entire game, a guy who only really has a plan for getting up on the team. But then it's kind of like panic mode for the next half of the game, and we better hope that the defense sets us up in good field position, or else I don't know what we're going to do. That seems to be what we're looking at right now. And of course, offense all over the place right now. And of course, now going to Jalen Hurts' play and how he developed this game. Well, looking at his attempts, he was 23 out of 38 for his passing attempts, and he had 280 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, a QB rating of 108.05. So that's where we stand, of currently with Jalen Hurts at this time. So overall, with his game, he was able to find receivers open downfield. Now, of course, there were some times that he was caught. Again, his senses with reading the blitz, and of course, his senses with just in general, with his pocket sense, kind of scares me at times, or his ability to not really know when to get rid of the ball. I mean, how many times do we see a guy sneak up behind him and sack him from behind? Or how many times have we seen him today, especially specifically this game, where he kind of stands still in the pocket and collapses as that pocket kind of surrounds him and has really no reaction? Or how many times again do we see him have all the time in the world standing back there and still not able to find a receiver open? And when they went to those replays with the camera on the string, right, look behind him, there was guys that were open, but again, Hurts seems to be going back to this thing where if you're not completely wide open, I'm not going to throw the ball to you. So there were some situations, there were some concerning situations with Hurts this game, but overall, he was able to get the ball out of the pocket. And of course, that final drive, hey, they were still able to get down there. Would I wish that he would be a little better with releasing the ball out of the pocket at a quicker rate? Absolutely. But still, Hurts was able to play not an awful game, but still, yeah, it just wasn't enough to get the job done. Of course, they were all over the place. The QB was not on the same page with the wide receivers. The offensive line was not on the same page with what the QB was doing. And sometimes I think the offensive coordinator was not on the same page with the whole team, and he probably didn't even know what was going on half the time. So the Eagles on offense right now, yes, to sum it up, they're all over the place. No one's ever on the same page, and it's a situation where every single week it doesn't necessarily seem to change. We still, folks, only know how to play one half of football. That's the summary coming out of this week, unfortunately, and that's kind of where we stand at this point in time, especially going up against a Broncos defense that is not forgiving at all one bit. But now, of course, moving on to the defense, and yes, folks, it was a pretty good first half of the defense, but again, yes, I already got to talk about this right here, and that is worn. The defense was getting completely worn out, and this goes back to the stat originally that I said at the beginning of the game. When your offense goes 5 of 6 in the second half, and 5 of 6 of the second half drives result in 0 points, it's going to wear your defense out. And especially when you get a good amount of 3 and outs where you're on the field for, barely at all, especially where the Eagles at the beginning of the fourth quarter got on the field, had a chance to, hey, let's go down there, let's score it, let's put, kind of back the Broncos off. They were kind of gaining momentum. Again, remember, in the beginning of the fourth quarter, the Broncos, yes, they didn't have the lead yet, folks. And this was something where, again, when we look at what happened in that fourth quarter where the Eagles got outscored 18-0 in the fourth quarter, that's a situation that kind of hurts as well. And of course, looking at it once again, yes, they were getting worn out. The 3 and outs didn't help. The Eagles had a 3 and out at the beginning of that first quarter where they had the ball around a minute long. It was probably the most depressing drive I've ever seen in my life. Well, it wasn't a drive. It was a 3 and out. I don't even know why I'm going to call it that. But yes, it was definitely not great to see. And of course, there were many breakdowns that did indeed start happening on the defense, of course, with guys like Quinyon Mitchell against Sutton. He had many attempts where he was supposed to keep Sutton under control, and he could not make some plays there. Of course, we had some other breakdowns, right, with some penalties, right, with Zach Bond. Of course, we had some other issues that happened with Cooper DeJean. There were some breakdowns in the secondary multiple times. And then, of course, with the defensive line, that's what I got to go to as well, was the defensive line was another situation where, unfortunately, the pressure really fell off in a big-time way. And the Eagles' defensive line this year specifically against the run is kind of concerning. It went from being one of the best in the league to not being that great at all, and kind of falling within the middle areas of the league at this time in the rankings. But yes, the Eagles' defensive line right now, not necessarily the greatest thing in the world. And of course, going back to the secondary, like I was saying, you also had guys out there like Ringo, who was struggling to guard some simple post routes, and as well going to that 2-point conversion that the Broncos got to originally take the lead in the game, and when they took the lead to make it 18-17, yes, what happened? Well, it was an easy 2-point conversion. Who was on them? Kelly Ringo. And for a guy that's supposed to have all this speed, it wasn't necessarily looking like it, as there were times where Zach Bond and Kelly Ringo were on the same guy, and Bond looked faster. And Bond, he's a linebacker, folks, in case you forgot. But yes, it was just a game that was all over the place. The defense, at the end of the day, was completely wearing out. and it was something not exactly great to see. Is again, in the first quarter, defense did great. They held Bo Nix in the first half to only 10 out of 21 for his attempts and 79 yards with a QB rating of 57.4. That's what they held Bo Nix to at the first half, and Bo Nix ended up finishing the game and turning those stats completely around to having 24 out of 39 for his passing attempts, 242 yards, and he raised up his QB rating to 93.11. So this is something where they just allowed the Broncos back into the game. There's no other way to say it. They had the chance to put them away. They allowed them back in the game. They didn't. I mean, the offense completely collapsed. They blacked out. The defense started, unfortunately, falling apart. They were wearing down. The Broncos offense was wearing them down. They knew exactly what they were doing with the plays that were called. And this was just something where, at the end of the day, the Eagles handed over the control to the Broncos. Again, like I said, the Eagles were shooting the Broncos, and then they turned the gun on themselves, and was something that, at the end of the day, again, was kind of depressing to watch the downfall and the death of a team as they get their first loss of the season. But now, of course, yes, week 6 will be here before you know it. And when I mean here, it will be here before you know it. Yes, the Eagles open up week 6 Thursday Night Football against the New York Giants. Of course, Thursday, October 9th, 8:15 p.m. on Prime. This is going to be something where we'll see what the Eagles can do. You're going up against a not-so-good team. Yes, they are still a division rival, even though you kick their butts every year. But still, this is the opportunity to get everything back on your side again. Of course, the Giants are also coming off of a depressing loss against the New Orleans Saints, which they gave the Saints their first win of the season. A team without a quarterback beat the Giants. Yes, again, the Giants are no big prize either, but still, the Giants were able to give the Saints their first win of the season, of course, 26-14. So we'll see what happens. The Eagles are already getting ready to go. They're already rehabbing for this week 6 opener on Thursday Night Football. So we'll see what the Eagles have to give. Of course, the Eagles have a 76.4% win probability over New York, and this will be played at MetLife Stadium. So the biggest thing that I ask out of this, besides getting the win, is please, with the injuries, I hope it's nothing too serious. I hope there are no serious injuries that come out of the MetLife turf monster. Those of you who know, yes, MetLife is probably one of the worst fields, if not the worst field in the NFL, of course, with how injuries happen. And of course, the Giants' best wide receiver literally had a big-time ACL injury a couple weeks ago where, yes, on MetLife's turf. So this is something where, yeah, it's not exactly the greatest thing in the world. Hopefully the Eagles don't get any big-time injuries coming out of the turf monster and MetLife Stadium. But we'll see what the Birds can do. Again, 76.4% win probability. Hopefully they can get the job done in not New York, North Jersey. But we'll see what happens. But that's all for this Week 5 Eagles chat. Things did not go the way we wanted it to. The Eagles pick up their first loss of the season. But we'll see what they can do. Hopefully they can get back to the winning ways once again. Come up Thursday for the start of Week 6. That's all for me. And as always, go Birds! Have a good rest of your week, everyone, and we'll be back here on Friday to cover the start of Week 6 with this very, very short week. Have a good one.